Labour government's legacy. The best way to describe the British government as a whole, and the media for that matter, is this: shit has hit the fan, broke it, caught fire, and roasted itself. Yet another Prime Minister resigns, and another potential candidate and now incumbent just randomly appears out of nowhere, like an NPC spawning or glitching in and out of game. The title, despite having Labour in it, also refers to the British government as a whole, which was predominantly conservative for 14 years. The last general election, I voted for reform, as reading their manifesto, it aligned with some of what I wanted the British government to take seriously. Nuclear energy, nuclear energy, strict immigration, and lower taxes. I remember reading the manifesto for both the Conservatives and Labour at the time. However, I had already concluded that they were two sides of the same coin and it wouldn't make a difference which was in power. All that has happened is a fast track towards an inevitable doom. The point of this essay or rant, or whatever you'd call this, is simply to lay bare the sheer embarrassment and incompetence of the men and women running the country, and above all else, to note the failures that I have observed. Approximately 100 Labour MPs, and staffers went to the United States to campaign and raise money for the Kamala Harris and Tim Walz presidential run, whose opponents were President Donald J. Trump, incumbent, and Vice President J.D. Vance, incumbent. During 2016's presidential victory for Donald Trump, every media outlet and opposition to Trump claimed election interference and accused him of being a Russian agent. Fast forward 8 years, the British Labour government openly commits election interference and asks the British taxpayer to donate to the Harris Waltz campaign, who rightfully and deservedly so lost. Peter Mendelsohn, all that I know of him is that he was a long-time Labour Party member who also had connections with Jeffrey Epstein, and it wouldn't surprise me if more were. What this shows is that in order to get into politics, you have to become a career politician and become assimilated into that culture, which is why it is almost impossible and a downright miracle when a political anomaly such as Donald Trump is able to break that closed ecosystem. The Pakistani rape gang inquiry was blocked by the Labour government, which resulted in one of the largest successful crowdfunding campaigns. MP Rupert Lowe and a team consisting of independent reporters, investigators, victims, and survivors brought to light the festering rot that has been allowed to plague English women and girls for over 70 years. An industrial scale operation of rape, torture, human trafficking, abuse, corruption, and just an utter lack of humanity from every institution from the ground up with the report stating the bare minimum number of victims is 250,000 white English girls and women. This does include men, women, boys, and girls of all races and religions, but the case investigated how a majority of the Pakistani Muslim men targeted specifically white English girls and women. Escalating tension and war between Russia and Ukraine saw the British government, as well as other European nations, donate financial and military resources to help Ukraine defend itself against a nuclear superpower. There was much speculation on whether the British Army was already deployed to the front lines as a malevolent force pushed the UK into a possible all out war with Russia. The motivations behind this conflict are dubious. I would consider it a proxy war, albeit the result has been unimaginable loss of life and victims of war. The British media does not show how Ukrainian boys and men are pulled off the streets, literally being kidnapped in broad daylight to go fight and die in a war they never wanted to happen. Furthermore, there has been several assassination attempts against President Donald Trump, with some of the would-be assassins having a history of supporting the Ukrainian army and actively trying to join the war. There has been evidence that those assassins received funding from Ukraine. The question is, has the money that the British government donated to the Ukrainian government been used to fund assassination attempts against the sitting president? And if so, does this directly or indirectly implicate the British taxpayer? As this would mean the Labour government has either intentionally or unintentionally got the United Kingdom in trouble and possible war with not one but two nuclear superpowers. I, I cannot imagine an audit of the Ukrainian government, which in the early 2010s was described as the most corrupt European country. From what I can remember, they have not had an election since the start of this conflict, which may be the ultimate reason why. Unrelenting mass migration has totally and completely atomized the social and cultural fabric of the United Kingdom. The UK is experiencing a mass identity crisis that so far has only one outcome, which is to self destruct. I do not know who the winners are. This identity crisis is further exacerbated by the erosion of Christianity. The UK and the West as a whole has been built on the bedrock of Christian teachings. That is, irrespective of whether you are religious or not. The irony of Christianity being undermined and completely uprooted is that a proportion of the migrants are themselves practitioners of the Christian religion. I remember as a child that some Indian families would send their kids to Roman Catholic schools instead of public schools. Africans such as Nigerians and Kenyans are devout Christians and extremely family and community oriented. Multiple compounding factors have been recorded and immortalized on the internet for everyone to see just how bad the cultural clashes have become. Not only that, diseases, illnesses, and disorders that were otherwise solved or non-existent have has been reintroduced into the British population. Female genitalia mutilation, which is predominantly an African and Islamic practice, has become so prevalent in the UK, the government has a budget for this specific cultural problem that is otherwise not a native or indigenous practice. It is not something white English men and women have ever practiced, as far as I'm aware. The influx has been so great that there are parallel justice systems, policing, education, societies, and infrastructure. No-go zones were called conspiracy theories, but there are there are there have been multiple examples in the past. Some in Leicester, Nottingham, Birmingham, London, and Manchester. Traffic wardens would not dare to go to these areas as they would be followed home and have their families targeted. Political correctness, diversity training, and cultural sensitivities has allowed genuine and authentic criticism to be silenced and shut down. Words like Islamophobia has done nothing but allowed animosity to fester and grow, since genuine concerns regarding the Islamic religion and integration are deemed racist. Gangs of Muslim men went around Birmingham and London looking for people of the Jewish faith in a sort of modern day witch hunt. Major cities and towns have become so utterly foreign, you could literally build a wall around them and call it a separate state or nation. This is balkanization, I think, when ethnic enclaves overrule, undermine, and dismantle the host nation. The bizarre fetish surrounding digital ID and the digitization of the whole structure of the country will eventually cripple the UK for a reason the government or the media has not acknowledged: the Kessler syndrome. There are thousands of satellites orbiting Earth, hundreds of thousands. Each time a country tries to launch a rocket or a satellite into space, the chances of it hitting a piece of space debris or satellite increases and regularly happens, causing rockets to explode and sending everyone back to the drawing board. Since the modern world is built around GPS, Wi Fi, internet, and digital technology, this all relies on having satellites orbiting Earth. The Kessler syndrome posits that a chain reaction occurring in space where satellites crash into each other will last for 2 days. From start to finish, in just 2 days, every piece of digital technology will become redundant and obsolete. Cars, bikes, hospitals, manufacturing, power plants, GPS, social media will quite literally stop working as everything is connected to the internet and the internet relies predominantly on satellites. Not only will we lose all of our technology, but also any capability of resolving the digital collapse, as the broken satellites orbiting Earth will essentially become shrapnel from a grenade. Launching more rockets will only result in its destruction. Humanity, in a sense, will have become trapped and confined to a single rock. The COVID 19 lockdowns were a complete abuse of power by not just the British government, but multiple governments and institutions. Alongside the vaccines that were manufactured, the entire period brought to light multiple issues. For starters, free speech and censorship. On social media, any mention of the word COVID or coronavirus would result in a content creator having their channel and subsequently livelihood removed. Media outlets were used as propaganda to create fear and division, saying that anti vaxxers are the problem and those that do not wear a mask or follow social distancing are putting everyone else at risk. To highlight just how severe, total, and complete the censorship regarding free speech was, the United States' 2020 election was and still is the most corrupt electoral period for a first world country. The Democrat Party had manipulated all media and social media outlets to quell any and all dissent regarding the presidential win for Joe Biden. Every institution across the world basically converged and transformed into a black hole with history being actively rewritten. Only now, 6 years later, are we finding out just how malignant and corrosive the 2020 presidential election was, and 2020 by extension. Coming back to the lockdowns, job, jobs were lost, families were lost, children were torn away from mothers, otherwise healthy individuals either developed serious health conditions or quite literally died after receiving the vaccination. Japanese scientists discovered self-assembling nanostructures within some versions of the COVID vaccine. The British government introduced some of the harshest social distancing and lockdown policies in the world, essentially quarantining the population. Consequences of disobeying the new laws were being arrested and sent to prison for going for a walk by yourself. To add to a global pandemic, drug addict and convicted felon George Floyd died from an overdose whilst being restrained by a police officer in the US. This kick-started what was nothing short of a civil war in the United States, which then spread to the rest of Europe. Black Lives Matter was a spawn of this catastrophe, with nearly every single media outlet, celebrity, and politician framing it as a murder of an innocent black man and an example of police brutality. The result was a mass movement calling for all police forces to be defunded and removed, which unsurprisingly in the UK led to gangs of machete wielding lunatics running around and hacking people to bits and pieces, and an increase in terror related incidents. The media and society was completely captured by an ideology that originated in the US and didn't stop to think whether burning buildings, houses, and property into the ground, donating millions, if not hundreds of millions, to what was supposedly a charity, No one stopped to think that was all this necessary. The Black Lives Matter organization should have been labeled as a domestic terror group after literally tearing cities and states apart, creating autonomous zones, and stopping ambulances and emergency services from even responding to incidents which led to the deaths of innocent lives. It was plain to see at the time, and even now, 6 years later, that it was to undermine President Trump and to remove him from office. As the Democrat Party has been for the best part of 12 years, painting Donald Trump to be a Hitler like figure, the left wing and woke are so completely warped in their fiendish and rabid perception of President Trump. I could literally use a time machine, travel all the way back in time to when Hitler was still alive, bring him back to the current day, and put him and Trump on a debate stage with almost certainly the left wing and the woke and the Democrat Party supporting Hitler in an effort to ruin Trump. I wanted to carry on and go on, but it's clear and plain to see that we are living in a dystopia of our own making. Jumping from one general election to another, voting and making decisions out of spite and contempt for the opposition. Serious, serious contemplation for the direction of the United Kingdom needs to be had from the bottom up, not top down. I have referred to political parties as the whole entity that they are, but there are individuals within Labour and Conservative that may be more level headed and grounded. Being, being an independent means having no power. What I have learned about politics since COVID-19 is that politics is purely about having power over how people ought to live their life. Only one or two politicians have shown true leadership, one being Rupert Lowe and the other being President Donald J. Trump.